Hi, my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO and founder of an independent ERP and digital transformation firm called Third Stage Consulting. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about risk management and what it means to your ERP implementation project. And more specifically, wanted to talk about what you can do to address risk in your ERP implementations. And even before we get to that, what are the major risks that most organizations face when they are going through their ERP implementations or digital transformations? And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the data from our 2019 ERP report, which covers companies across the globe that have implemented either ERP technology or some other sort of digital transformation within the last few years. And this is a very broad-based global study that we've been doing for over a decade now, our team and I. And what I want to talk about is just some of the key findings from a risk management perspective. Before we get to that, though, just to give you a quick overview of the 2019 ERP report, this is something that, like I said, we've done for several years now. We gather quantitative and qualitative data from recent digital transformation. So we look at not only things we can measure, but we're also looking for trends and patterns in some of that qualitative data and understanding what the statistical correlation is between success and failure. So we're looking really into the root causes of what causes these projects to succeed, and in other cases, what causes projects to fail. And we're also looking for trends over time. And at the end of the day, we want to provide lessons for those of you about to go through a digital transformation or an ERP implementation. So to start, when we talk about risk, probably the biggest risk that people typically don't talk about is operational disruption. Most of the time, when people think risk, they think if I go over time, if I go over budget, if I fail to get the benefits I realize, those are all significant risks and things to be worried about. But the biggest risk that organizations face when we look at it quantitatively is operational disruption. And what we mean by that is companies that are materially disrupted, not just a little bit, but they can't ship product. They can't close the books. They're not able to track inventory. They're not able to pay employees. So major operational disruptions. And when we look at companies over the years, as they've gone through their digital transformations, the number has been very consistent, somewhere between 51 and 54%, according to our research. So when we look at organizations that experience this sort of operational disruption, just over half of them have this sort of disruption. And when we look at the cost that goes along with that disruption, we find that the increase in your total cost of ownership ends up escalating from anywhere from 50% to 300%. It's kind of a bell curve. Most organizations fit somewhere in that bell curve of the ones that are operationally disrupted. So in other words, if the company had an estimate of $1 million or $10 million to do their transformation, the impact of operational disruption adds another 50% to up to 3 times that initial total cost of ownership, based on things ranging from lost sales, other types of lost inventory, other things that materially affect your financials. So that's really, from a quantitative perspective, probably the biggest risk to think about is operational disruption. Now, what we can do about operational disruption in terms of looking at what variables would most mitigate that risk during the digital transformation, you can see 4 of them listed here on the right side of your screen. First is that clearly defined business processes, and making sure we've got clarity around what our business processes are and what we want them to be going forward. Also, investing in organizational change and training. That's another key component of what we look for in terms of mitigating some of the risk of operational disruption. And then also making sure that we have executive alignment among the key stakeholders in the transformation project team. So one of the biggest things you can do before beginning your ERP implementation is to make sure that your project is aligned with those higher level strategic imperatives or goals and objectives of your executive team. And then finally, the number 4 biggest correlation between success and failure has to do with the time and effort spent during user acceptance testing and conference room pilots. So making sure that we fully vetted and tested the system and the processes, not just from a technology perspective, but more importantly, from a business process and user acceptance perspective. So those are some of the biggest things we can do to mitigate the number 1 quantitative risk that we see in digital transformations, which is operational disruption. Now, when we think about another way to look at implementation risk is to ask those that have recently been through a transformation, what are the top challenges you faced during your digital transformation? not necessarily what was the outcome or what was the biggest problem you had, but what was the biggest challenge you had during the transformation itself. So a little bit different way of assessing risk and looking at what can we expect for our digital transformations during the sort of ERP project. And the number one response was organizational change and the people part of the transformation. So if there's one thing we can invest heavily in, it's going to be organizational change. And if you recall, going back to the previous slide, organizational change and training was the number two thing, the number two bullet listed here in terms of the thing that had the biggest correlation and impact on operational disruption. So when we ask people objectively, though, what were your biggest challenges? Organizational change rated even higher in the minds of people that have recently been through transformations. Number two is that the transformation was misaligned with the strategic objective. So again, getting back to the previous point of how to avoid operational disruption, that's a key component, is to make sure that we look at the overall strategic objectives, make sure the transformation's aligned. Difficulty managing or addressing deficiencies with the system integrator was number three. So that was the number three challenge that organizations most commonly had during their transformations. Number four, clarity of business processes and making sure that we had a clear business blueprint for how we'd like to deploy the technology. And then number five is difficulty with data migration. So those are the top five challenges and risks that organizations experience when we ask after the fact, after they've been through an ERP implementation. And those are the five things that CIOs and project managers, program directors, project team members, those types of people that we survey, those are the five things that we found. So it's very important to be aware of these risks as you go through an ERP implementation. It's very important to understand what the risks are and how to mitigate those risks. No ERP implementation project is easy. Neither is a broader digital transformation. So hopefully this helps you provide some context and just to know what to expect when going into an ERP implementation in terms of how to manage that risk. If you have other questions, feel free to contact me. I'm including my phone number and email address here, as well as my Twitter and LinkedIn information if you'd like to connect with me in social media. The other thing is if you'd like to download the actual 2019 ERP report, which has a lot more detail than what I've talked about here today, feel free to download that. I've included a link in the description of this video on the YouTube channel. And then finally, speaking of my YouTube channel, if you wouldn't mind, please subscribing to my YouTube channel. That'll make sure you get updated every time we put out new material like this one. So I hope that you found this helpful. Thank you very much for your time and hope you all have a great day.